Hello guys, this is Miko. In this tutorial or lecture in the series, we will create a to-do app like I promised, and we will be able to authenticate. We will be able to add to-dos, delete them, edit them, and create them. So we will need a few things because this is a MERN stack. We will be using Mongodb. So let's install Mongodb first. I will go to google.com and I will write Mongodb download. And this is the Mongodb community download. And it should be available for your operating system. Just download the installer and install it on your computer. And when it asks you to install MongoDB Compass, it should be already checked. Just continue and let it install Compass because we will need it. As you can see, I have it installed here. I can open it as well. It's gonna take some time. So you should have Node.js installed, so nodejs.org. The newest version is 14.16. You should download this one. And also, well, that's all you need actually. So, and I have VS Code as my editor. I think you have the same, but PHP Storm or WebStorm will also be good. So I will go to my folder, YouTube, and I will make ToDo, and I will open this folder with VS Code. So go to htdocs, MERN, no, it's not MERN, it's YouTube, ToDo, open. Now we will need to create, first we will start off with backend. So backend will consist of database, MongoDB, Express, and Node.js. So let's create a folder called server and open a new terminal and go to cd server and say npm init-y. And now you can say, I'm using yarn, but you can also say npm install. So you can say yarn add express mongoose bcrypt.js. This is for password hashing. JSON web token. And we will also need, what else do we need? nodemon.env, and I think that's it. So it's installing, it should be very fast. And as you can see, I have a package.json, and we will create a start script. We will say nodemon index.js, and we will create a new file called index.js, and we will say const express equals require express, and we will say we also need body parser. I just remembered, yarn add body parser. And while it's downloading, or it's already done, we can say const body parser equals require body parser. And here we can say const app equals express. And we can say app.use body parser.json. And we will say app.listen, and here we will have a const port equals process env node port. And here we will say port, and we will have a console log of backticks here, and we will say server started on port, and where is $sign on my keyboard? I'm not sure. Okay, and we will say port. So that's the basic app, and now we will need to create a env file where we will say node port equals 5000. And while we're at it, we'll add a MongoDB URI to connect to the database, and that will be MongoDB localhost 27 017 / ToDo. This is the name of the database, and we will also need JSON Web Token secret, and it doesn't really matter what it is locally. Oh yeah, so that's it. And in index.js we will say const, and we will open curly braces, and we will say config equals require .env, and we will also say const path equals require path. And now we will set up our .env, so we will say config and curly braces path, and we will say path.join dir name /.env. Let's confirm that it's working. We will say yarn start on port undefined. Okay, so it's not taking it into consideration. Let me take a look at why. .env. So let's take a look again, and we have port 5000. Perfect. Now we will connect to the database, so we will say const mongoose equals require mongoose, and here we will say mongoose connect, and we will say process env mongodb URI, and we will need to specify some options. The first one is use find and modify to set to true. Second is use unified topology set to true. Third is use new URL parser set to true. And outside of this object, we will just have a console log of saying connected to MongoDB. And we will say yarn start, and we have connection to our MongoDB, as you can see, and server started on port 5000. So let's quit it for now, and now we will create a model, like I said in the introduction. So we will have models, and we will create a user.js. So we will say const mongoose equals require mongoose, and we will say const user schema. We create a schema now where we say new mongoose schema, and we give it an object. And before we define this object, I'll give it a second object where I say timestamps true. This will automatically add created add and updated add attributes to our model, to our schema and model. So we will keep it simple. We just have email, which is a string, and password, which is also a string. So now we will need to create a model. So we say const user equals mongoose model. We will call it user. It will use the user schema, and the collection will be called users. And we will module exports this user. So now let's create a ToDo. Let me just copy this one. Control C, Control V, F2 to rename it, and just call it ToDo. And open it, and just do this. Select the user and press Control D many times. Actually, it has to be case sensitive, so let's do it again. So in these, just write ToDo, and here write in the collection, write ToDos, and here we will just say title, string, and user ID, which will be mongoose. Let me think how we're going to structure this. Mongoose dot types dot object ID, and we will have completed, which is a boolean, and here we will export ToDo. So now we have this, and now we will create controllers. So we will say new controller will be, first will be, let's create a ToDo controller. We will call it ToDo controller.js, and we will say const ToDo equals require, go back one level, models, and ToDo. And we will have a few functions. So we'll say exports dot create ToDo equals async request response, which is an arrow function, and we will say const ToDo equals ToDo, and we will say rec body, and we will say await ToDo let's save, and we will say res send status of port of status 201, which is created. Now we will say exports update ToDo async request response, and we will say await ToDo dot find by ID and update, and we will say rec params ID, and we will say set rec.body, and we will say res send status of 204, which is no content is returned from the database, from the backend. Now we will have exports dot delete ToDo, which is async request response, and we will say await ToDo dot find by ID and remove, and we will just say rec params ID, and we will say res send status of 204. And now finally we will have exports get ToDos for user, and we will have rec res, and this will be this we'll do later. So let's create a authentication controller, so called auth controller.js, and we will say const user equals require user, models user, And so we will say exports login equals async request response, and here we will say const user. We will not do validation in this series. I will create it as a separate video that will build on top of this tutorial. So I will say const user exists, const user equals await user dot find one, and we will say email is rec body email, which is what we send. And here we will say if not user, then we will return res status of 400, and we will send error wrong email. And here next we will say we will need a package called bcrypt.js. So we will say const bcrypt equals require bcrypt.js, and we will say const password equals await bcrypt dot compare, and we will say rec body password comma user dot password, and again if not password equals, then we will say return res status 400, and we will send an error saying wrong password. And if this is still here, then it means that the user is the password was correct and the email was found. So now we should authenticate the user. So we will say const token equals, and now we will need a JSON web token. So JWT require JSON web token, and now we will say JSON web token JWT sign, and we will just say user ID. It will be user.id. With MongoDB, the ID is with the underscore at the beginning. So we will need to provide a secret here, which is process.env.jwt secret, which is this one right here. We need this. And now we can say res send, and we can send the token. Now let's create a register. Exports register equals async request response, and we will say const user equals user rec.body await user.save. I know this is not very safe, but I will do some validation in a later video. So we have user, and we will say res.send status of 201. And one thing we need to do in our user model is provide a way to automatically hash the passwords, because the way it is now, if when we write a password in our front end and send it to the backend, it will be stored as plain text, like the way we wrote it. It will not be hashed. So we need a way to hash it, and we will do it with the function schema function. So to do this, we say user schema dot pre, and this needs to be called save, and we can say async function. Remember to do this this way, because if you do an arrow function, you will not have this keyword. And we will need bcrypt as well, so say bcrypt equals require bcrypt.js, and a user schema save, we will say const user equals this, if not user is modified password. And here in the function we also have a next middleware, so we will say next function, and actually return next, and otherwise we would say user password equals await bcrypt dot hash, and we will say user dot password, and we will give it 10 rounds of salt, and we will say next. So this way now our passwords are hashed, and we can go to our auth controller, and we need a middleware. So we will say middlewares, and we will call it parse token.js, and we will need JWT, so require JSON web token, and this is exports parse token equals request response next, and here we will say if not request headers authorization return next. Const token equals request headers authorization, and we will need to call the split function, and we will split it on a space, and we will reach out to the second element in the array. I will just explain why that is later. So if we don't have a token from this, then we will just need to say return next. Otherwise we will say const user ID equals JWT verify, and we will give it a token, and we will need to say process env JWT secret, and then we'll say return next. No, not yet actually. We'll need to say res locals user ID equals user ID, and we actually need to say try catch here, and paste this here, and here we will just say return next. So that's our middleware for parse token, which we will need to use here. So app.use parse token. And we will need to create another function in our auth controller called init exports.init. It will be an async function, and it will take a request response, and we will say let user equals null, and if res locals user ID, it means that we have a user ID. We will say user dot await user find by ID res locals user ID, and here we will say res send user, and actually we will find the to-dos as well. So to-do, and then require models to-do And while it's doing this, let's create a React application. So we will open another terminal and we will say npx create React app client, and let it do its work, and let's continue. So we need to get the to-dos. So and we will say let to-dos equals empty array, and here we will say to-dos equals await to-do.find, and we will say where user ID is equal to user._ID, and we will also pass the to-dos here. So now in the server we need some routes, so we will say routes here, and we will need an index.js, and here we will say const express const router equals require express dot router, and we will say module exports router, and we will need authentication routes, so we will say auth.js, and we will say again we will copy this here, and we will need our controller methods, so we will say const and destructor it equals require, go back one level, go to controllers and auth controller, and if you do this this trick, if you put your cursor in the middle of the curly braces and press Control space, you will get the auto completion. So you can just press enter, comma, Control space, enter, and here we will say const, no, we say router dot get, and this will be API of init, and it will be init function, and say router.get API of login, and it will be login, and this should be post, and now we'll say router.post API of register, which will be register. So that's our auth routes. Now our to-do routes, to-do.js, paste, change this to to-do controller, and delete these methods, and do the same thing, create to-do, delete to-do, get to-dos for user, and update to-do, and we will say API to-do, and just like that, and it will be and we will need, but before we do this, we need another middleware called is authenticated, no, we can just call it authenticated.js, and we will say exports dot authenticated equals request response next, and say if not res locals user ID return res dot status dot send, and we will say error not authenticated, and otherwise we will just return next. So we need this here, so we say authenticated, it's in the list here, so and we can just say this will be a delete route, so we will say to do, and here we will say ID, and we will say authenticated and delete to do. and here we will say ToDo. This will be put ToDo.id, and this will be authenticated as well. And here we will say update ToDo, and router.post API/ToDo, which is also authenticated, and we will say create ToDo. And this function should not be init, this should be get ToDos for user. So I think that's it. We need to import these routes here. So we will say router.use require auth, and copy the line Alt Shift down, and call this ToDo. And we will also need some public routes to display the the finished product. So we'll say public.js, and we will say, well, we need to do it again, const router equals require express dot router, and here we will say module dot exports router, and we will say router dot get, and it's slash, and then we will say we will have request response, and let me think, and we will say res send file, and this will be, we need the path, const path equals require path, and this will be path dot join, and their name, and go back one level to the server, go back one level to the root, and go to client build index.html. And now we will need another route, and I will explain why in a second, like so. This is so that when we use the React router DOM, we need to refresh the page. We need to, it will not work without this route, because it will not catch the URL. First it goes through the backend and then goes to the React. And if we don't have this wildcard route, we will only display React from the root route, root URL. But we don't want that. We want be able to use React router DOM and be able to refresh the page as well. So go back to index and say router.use require public. Remember, public has to be at the bottom. So it should be all. And here we can say now we can go to client, and we can say we need to install some packages. We need to say yarn add or npm install react router DOM and Axios, and that's all we need for this tutorial. And here we will say yarn start, and everything's working. And then now let's go to the client. So basically in the client we need to edit the package.json, and we need to say proxy, and we need to say http localhost port 5000, which is the port of our backend. So we can say we can just clean up a few things. So in index.js we can clean this up, we can clean this up, and we need to say import browser router from React router DOM, and instead of this React strict mode we will say browser router, and here as well browser router, and in our app.js I will just rename this to JSX, and this I will rename to JSX, and here we will say pages, and we will have a few pages. So we will have the page called ToDo.tsx. We will have the page called login.tsx and register.tsx. So let's create register. I will use the shortcut I have in VS Code called RFC, and it creates a function, and here basically we will have a few things. So what I will use is I will use some hooks. So I will say const, and I will say email, set email equals use state, and it will be empty string. Copy the line, and this will be password and set password, and I will create a function called const submit equals async event, and we'll say event.prevent default, and we also need something called then HTTP client.js. So basically we will say export const HTTP client, which will be a function that will have Axios. So we need to import Axios from Axios, and here we will say const default settings equals authorization, and we will say authorization will be first we need to see if we have a token. So we say local storage.getItem token, and if we have a token, then we will say bear and token, otherwise empty string. And here we will return an object with a few things. So we'll have get, and this will be a function that will call axios.get, and here we will need a URL and options, and this will go to the URL, and it will take default settings and options. So basically copy this line 4 times, and this will be called post, and besides URL we also need data, and here we will say data, and here we will say post, and here we will say put URL data, and we will need data here as well, and we will need put here, and you guessed it, I will just select 2 at the same time, and this is just delete, and now we should be able to make requests. So if we go to our register, we can say const data equals email and password, and now we can say await HTTP client dot post, and we will say API of register, and we will say data, and we will say window dot location dot href equals auth login. Now this auth login is not the API route, it's the client route, because it doesn't have API in front of it. We will create this route soon. So now this will be very ugly. It will be a form of unsubmit that will take our unsubmit function, and we will have an input of type text that will be a placeholder. We will say email, and value will be email, and unchange we will say event set email event target value, and we will have a BR, and just copy this line, paste it, and it auto formatted for me. And here we will have password, and here we will have password, sorry, and we will have password here, and set password, and we will need another BR, and we will have a button that will say register. So basically copy this, paste it in login, and what we need to change is the route here to login, and actually this is a bit more. We need to say try catch, and if we are logged in, then we will also get a token. So we'll say const response equals, and we will say set local storage set item token comma response that data that token from our backend, and we redirect to the homepage. Otherwise, let's create a new state called const error set error equals use state, and we will just have an empty string. So, and here we will say set error, and this will be error response dot data dot error, and here we will create a conditional that will say if error, then we will say h3, where we will say error. No styling here, nothing, and this is not question mark, this should be doubled ampersand, because it's only one condition. There is no else, in other words. So we have register, and now let's create our to do. So RFC, and no, first let's test that it's working with our login and register. So here we can say yarn start, wait, it should not be, I created TSX, it should be, I'm used to using TypeScript, so this should be JSX, and this also should be JSX, and this should be JSX. So let me just delete this and say yarn start again. Let me drink something, because I've been talking for 45 minutes now, and Yeah. So we should have a React app. Here we go. And now we go to our React app and we clean it up. We don't need this, we don't need this. So we will need a few things. We can just go like this. And we will need to import a few things. Import. We'll need switch and route and redirect. Use state. No wait, sorry. From React router done. And here we'll have switch, and here we'll have route, path, auth, login, and we'll have login. We didn't automatically import it, so let me just import it myself. Import login from pages login, and copy this, paste it here, say register, and we have this already. Wait, well, that's why, because it was called register. We need to call it login. So if we say register, we have register. And let's take a look at auth register, and we don't have anything for some reason. No, because it's called login, it should be register. So now we have this, and if we say, if I register with Nikolai at test.com and path will just test, I didn't really get anything. 404 not found. Let me take a look. Cannot post to API auth register. Let me go to my server and go to routes auth API auth register. Okay, that's because we didn't import our routes. So we say app.use require routes, and that's it. And now if we register again, we are at login, as you can see. And I will not save this. And if we go to our compass, we go to our ToDo users, and you can see I have email, Nikolai test, and password is hashed. And we have created that and updated that. So now let's try to log in with the wrong one. So Nikolai2 at test.com and test something, and we have wrong email. And if we write the right one and register, it should say login. But if we write the correct one, then we should be able to we are logged in, and we can confirm this by going to application here in Chrome and local storage and 3000, and we have a token. Now we need to go to our app.jsx, and we need to say const init equals async function, and we will say const user set user equals use state null, and we will say const async init, and we will say await const data equals await HTTP client, dot get, and we will say API of init, and we will say set user data.user. And if we go to our page and refresh it, and we go to console, well, we didn't call it, we need to call the init function. So to call it, we say use effect, and we provide it with a empty dependency array to only run it once, and we say init. And if we refresh the page, we should go to init, and user is null. For some reason, it should not be null, it should be logged in. So there is something wrong here. Let me go to the middleware parse token, and I will say const console log token, and I will refresh the page. This is, I will teach you now to debug. So we don't have anything. Default settings. Yeah, so it should say headers, and like so. And if we refresh, maybe now we have a user. Now we have a user, as you can see. So we are logged in. So now let's take a look at our to-do. So basically what we will have is a method to create a to-do. So we have a create to-do, and we will say we have a new state called const new to-do, and set new to-do equals use state and it will be empty string. So const new to-do const data equals ToDo new to-do, and we will also, yeah, we need the user somehow. So okay, so we will create a new file in our client called context.js, and we will say const app context equals const app context equals create context, and we will say user null, and we will export default export. Actually, we can just export const app context. So now we need to use this context. This will be our way of passing the data around. So we need to have this right here. Actually, we can have it here, right here. So we'll say app context dot provider value, and we can say user. And actually here we will have a route path slash exact, and we will say to do. So in our to do, we need to get this user from the context. So we will say const, and we will say user equals use context, and we will say app context, and it's automatically imported, as you can see here. And user ID will be user.id, and completed will be false. So here we will have a field set, legend will be called new ToDo, and here we will have an input of type text. Value will be new ToDo, and unchanged will be event set new ToDo e target value, and placeholder will be enter new ToDo. And then below that we'll have a button, and we'll say create ToDo, and here we'll have an unclick function that will just create the ToDo. And this should not have a semicolon. And now we will await HTTP client dot post, and it will go to API ToDo, and it will go to data. Now let's and this should be an async function, and we have a new ToDo. So let's create a ToDo called do chores, and create it. And we have created, we have a status of 201, and if we go to our database, we can see that we have do chores, user ID, and completed false. And if we refresh, we have also to-dos, and we have this ToDo. So what we can do, we need to edit our, let me just close others and open our context, and I will say to-dos, and this is an empty array. So in our app.jsx, I will create a new state called to-dos, and set to-dos use state, which will be an empty array. And here we will say set to-dos data to-dos, and here we will say to-dos. So and here we can just pull it with to-dos, and below this field set we'll create a new field set, and we'll create a legend, and it will say your to-dos. And let me just think. We will say we'll have a div here, and we'll have to-dos.map to-do index, and we'll say div and we will say first we'll have h4, which will say to-do.title. Then we will have and here we will just style it like so, display flex, and gap 1 rem. So here we will have an h5, and we will say to-do completed. If it's completed, then we will say completed, otherwise we will say not completed. And actually we will need to say here this will need to be an input of type text, and here in the div also we need a key of type to-do.id or index. Actually we don't need this index. So this text will have the value of to-do.title, and unchanged we'll have we'll create a function const handle to-do title const handle to-do change, actually title change. equals, and we will have index and value. So here we'll do some trick called to-dos, and we'll make a copy of to-dos, and we'll say to-dos index dot title equals value, and we'll say set to-dos to-dos. We don't have set to-dos, so we will just say here we will need set to-dos, and this will be a function, and here we will say set to-dos, and here we will need set to-dos. So here in this function we can just say handle to-do title change, and we actually do need the index. So we'll say index, and we'll say index, comma, e, target, value. And instead of this this thing, we will have another input of type checkbox, and checked will be equal to to-do dot completed, and we will say this will be a label, and it will say completed question mark, and let's take a look at how this looks like. And it's not completed, and we can edit, so it's perfect. So and also we will need a button called save, and we will save the changes. Actually we will create this as handle to do title change, handle to do change, and we will have a prop here, and instead of title, I will teach you a trick. We will say prop here within square brackets, and we will have the handle to do change, and this will be title, and here we will have unchange e handle to do change completed e target checked. And we have a problem. Let me take a look. Const. Okay, so we can delete this, and let's take a look at if everything still works. So we can no, we cannot. Let me take a look. We need to say handle to do change completed index. So we forgot the index, and now we should be able to do this. Yes, and now this button save, we need to have a new function called const save changes equals, and we will say to do id, no, just to do, and we will say await. We need an async here, and await HTTP client dot put, and we'll create a backtick API of, no, not of, to do, and slash todo.id, and we will pass our to do, and that's it. So now all we need to do is here have onClick, and we will say save changes. Let's take a look at if it already works without anything. do chores 1, save. Something is wrong. Save changes needs to have a to do here. So basically like this. So if we say 1, save, refresh, we have this. And if we say completed, save, refresh, it's completed. If we say not completed, it's not completed. So this works. So now we need the delete button, and we will have a const delete to-do async to-do ID, and we will say await. We actually will need a index as well. So HTTP client dot delete, and we will have API to-do slash to-do ID, and we will say const. We can copy this from before, and here we need to say to-dos, that's splice index comma 1 to delete it, and we set to-dos the new to-dos, and the delete to-do will need to be called delete to-do, and this takes to-do.id and index. And let's take a look. If we delete it, it's gone. If we refresh, it's still gone. So we say to-do 1, and we need to actually refresh it, but it works. To-do 2, refresh, it works. Complete to-do 2, save, refresh, and it works. And so that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and my plan is to actually implement some more advanced features into this app as time goes. For example, validation on the server and on the client, maybe some form for payments, user permissions, admin panel, and stuff like that. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a nice one.